I was moments from receiving my diploma, radiant in my cap and gown, when a university dean pulled me aside and demanded I erase my heritage or leave. The cap felt like a cardboard box perched precariously on my head, and the polyester gown was already making the back of my neck itch. But I didn't care. I couldn't stop smiling. From my seat in the third row of graduates, I could just make out my family in the stands. My dad was, of course, wrestling with a camera lens the size of a cannon. My little sister was waving a homemade sign that probably said something embarrassing. And my mom, she was just dabbing her eyes with a tissue, beaming. Seeing them, seeing that pride, it was like a shot of pure adrenaline. 4 years of all-nighters, of ramen noodle dinners, of questioning if I was smart enough or strong enough to be there. It all melted away in the warmth of that single look from my mother. This moment wasn't just for me, it was for them. It was for my grandmother, who couldn't be there, but was the reason I felt so grounded, so powerful, on this monumental day. Before I left the house that morning, she had sat me down, just like she did before any big event in my life. She'd taken my hands in her own, her fingers wrinkled and wise, and with a delicate brush and a pot of dark, earthy paste, she'd painted intricate symbols on the backs of my hands and a single powerful one on my right cheek, just below my eye. They were Adinkra symbols from Ghana, our ancestral home. On my hands she painted the duenemen, the ram's horns, a symbol of strength and humility. On my cheek she painted the sankofa, the bird looking backward. "Never forget where you come from, Amara," she'd whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It is the only way to know where you're going." The paste had dried into what looked like a beautiful, temporary tattoo. It wasn't a fashion statement. It was a blessing. It was my history, my armor. And as I sat there, surrounded by the sea of identical black caps and gowns, it was the one thing that made me feel entirely, unapologetically myself. The procession was about to begin. The low murmur of the crowd was starting to hush, replaced by the grand, slightly tinny sound of the university orchestra tuning up. I adjusted my tassel for the 10th time, my heart thumping a rhythm against my ribs that was a mix of pure joy and gut-wrenching nerves. That's when I felt a sharp tap on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see my friend Maya, wanting to share a last-minute panic smile. But it wasn't Maya. It was Mrs. Albright, the Dean of Students. She was a woman who seemed to be permanently smelling something unpleasant, with a posture so rigid I was convinced her spine was made of rebar. She wasn't smiling. "Miss Asante, a word, please," she said, her voice a low, clipped whisper that cut through the surrounding buzz. She gestured with a single, perfectly manicured finger towards the side exit of the auditorium. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. What could she possibly want? Did I forget to return a library book? Was there a problem with my final credits? I followed her into the dim hallway, the sound of the auditorium door closing behind us feeling unnervingly final. She turned to face me, her eyes not meeting mine, but instead fixing on a spot just below my right eye. "We have a situation," she began. Her lips pursed into a thin line. "The university has a very strict dress code for commencement. It's about uniformity, decorum. It ensures that the focus remains on the academic achievement of the collective student body." I just stared at her, completely bewildered. I was wearing the university-issued cap and gown. What on earth was she talking about? "I'm not sure I understand, Dean Albright," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm wearing the required regalia." Her gaze finally flickered up to meet mine, cold and dismissive. "It's not the regalia, Miss Asante. It's the markings." She gestured vaguely towards my face and hands. The Code of Conduct explicitly forbids any non-academic adornments, especially those on the face. We can't have students showing up with graffiti. Graffiti? The word hit me like a physical slap. The blessing from my grandmother, the symbols of my heritage, the armor that made me feel strong enough to even be in this building. She called it graffiti. "This isn't graffiti," I said, my voice stronger now, laced with a fury I didn't know I possessed. "They're Adinkra symbols. They're part of my culture, my grandmother." "I'm not interested in a cultural lesson," she cut me off, her tone sharp as broken glass. I am interested in upholding this university's standards. It is distracting and inappropriate. Other students and their families shouldn't be made to feel uncomfortable by your personal displays. My jaw dropped. Uncomfortable? Who was uncomfortable? My hands clenched into fists at my sides, the beautiful ram's horns crinkling on my skin. The orchestra inside struck the opening chords of Pomp and Circumstance. My line would be moving soon. My name would be called. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not here. Mrs. Albright seemed to sense my desperation, and leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost venomous hiss. You have two options, Amara. You can go to the ladies' room right now and scrub that stuff off your skin, or you can leave. You will not be permitted to walk across that stage looking like that. She pointed a stern finger towards the restroom at the end of the hall, then gestured with her thumb back towards the main exit. My heart stopped. My entire future, my family's pride, my 4 years of struggle, all came down to a choice between a bar of soap and my own soul. Leave. The word hung in the sterile hallway air between us. A final, unappealable verdict. For a split second, my brain fractured. One part of me saw my mother's face, her joyful tears turning to confusion and then to heartbreak as my name was called, and my chair remained empty. I saw my father lowering his giant camera, the pride draining from his posture. I saw my little sister's sign drooping. That vision was a physical pain, a twisting in my gut so intense it almost buckled my knees. This moment was supposed to be the culmination of their sacrifices, their belief in me. Choosing to leave felt like throwing it all back in their faces. But then I felt the phantom touch of my grandmother's fingers on my cheek, carefully painting the Sankofa bird. Never forget where you come from. Her voice was so clear in my head it was as if she were standing right next to me. And I realized what Dean Albright was really asking. She wasn't asking me to wash off some paint. She was asking me to wash off my grandmother, to scrub away my heritage, to stand in a line and be a uniform, blank, acceptable version of a graduate, a version that wasn't really me at all. She was asking me to agree that a part of me was graffiti, that my culture was inappropriate, and in that moment the choice became terrifyingly, achingly clear. I lifted my chin, my eyes locking with hers for the first time without a trace of fear. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the entire hallway. I will not be scrubbing anything off. And I will not be leaving. I have earned my place in that room, on that stage. My degree wasn't conditional on me erasing my identity, and my presence here today won't be either. A flicker of genuine shock crossed Dean Albright's face, quickly replaced by a mask of cold fury. "Is that your final decision, Miss Asante?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "It is," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Very well." She reached for a walkie-talkie clipped to her belt. "Security to the West Auditorium entrance. We have a non-compliant individual who needs to be escorted from the premises." My blood ran cold. Escorted. The word was so clinical, so dehumanizing. Before I could even process it, the hallway door swung open again. It was my friend Maya, her face etched with worry. "Amara, what's going on? They're about to call the A's." Her eyes darted from my face to the dean's, and she saw the unshed tears of rage in my eyes, and the triumphant, ugly glint in Albright's. "What did you do?" she asked the dean, her voice rising. "She is in violation of the university's code of conduct," Albright stated flatly, just as two burly security guards in ill-fitting blazers rounded the corner. They looked less like campus security, and more like bouncers. They didn't look happy to be there, but their expressions were impassive, trained. "For what?" Maya demanded, stepping in front of me. "For wearing her culture on her skin? Are you kidding me?" Dean Albright completely ignored her. She simply nodded at the guards. "This young woman needs to be removed. She is trespassing." The guards flanked me. One of them gently but firmly took my left arm. The other took my right. The touch, however professional, felt like a brand. Humiliation, hot and sharp, flooded through me. I was being thrown out of my own graduation. I was being treated like a criminal. Through the crack in the auditorium door, I could hear the announcer's voice booming. "Ashley Aronson, David Apt." My name was getting closer. They were walking me towards the heavy glass doors that led out into the parking lot, away from my family, my future, my moment. Each step was a fresh wave of shame. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. I would not give her that satisfaction. We were 3 feet from the exit. I could see the sunlight glinting off the cars outside. It was over. My fight was over before it even began. One of the guards reached for the push bar on the door, but before his hand could make contact, the door swung violently inward, crashing against the wall. Standing in the doorway, blocking our path, was Dr. Evans, the head of the African American Studies Department. He was a mountain of a man, with a graying beard and eyes that could see right through you. Behind him, Maya was pointing, her face a mask of furious desperation. Dr. Evans's gaze fell on the guards holding my arms, then on Dean Albright's smug face, and finally on the Sankofa symbol on my cheek. A low rumble started in his chest, a sound of pure, righteous anger. He planted his feet, his 6.4 frame, filling the entire doorway. "Let go of my student," he boomed, his voice echoing through the hall like a thunderclap. And through the door he held open, I could see dozens of other students in the back rows turning, their faces shifting from celebration to confusion, then to dawning horror as they saw what was happening. The 2 security guards froze, their hands still on my arms, but their grip suddenly uncertain. They exchanged a nervous glance, clearly unprepared to physically confront a man who was not only a respected department head, but also looked like he could bench press a small car. Dean Albright, however, was undeterred. She squared her shoulders, her face tightening into a prune of indignation. "Professor Evans, this is an administrative matter. This student has refused to comply with the commencement dress code and is being removed from the premises." "The dress code?" Dr. Evans's voice dripped with incredulous scorn. He took a step forward, forcing the guards to instinctively take a step back, pulling me with them. His eyes scanned the symbols on my hands and face, not with disgust, but with a deep, knowing respect. "You're removing a magna cum laude graduate, one of the brightest minds in her class, for honoring her ancestors, for wearing her heritage on her skin. Is that the standard this university is so proud of, Dean?" "The rules are for everyone," she snapped, her voice becoming shrill. "We cannot make exceptions for personal artistic expressions." The dismissal, the sheer willful ignorance in her tone, was like a lit match. Something broke inside me. It wasn't just my graduation anymore. It was every time I'd been told my hair was unprofessional, every time someone asked to touch it like I was a petting zoo exhibit, every time I had to code switch just to be heard in a classroom. It all came rushing to the surface in a tidal wave of fury. "They are not artistic expressions." My voice cracked, but it was loud, echoing in the now silent hallway. Everyone was looking at me. This is a blessing from my grandmother. This is my connection to Ghana. This is who I am. You asked me to choose between my degree and my identity, and I refuse. I have earned the right to be both. My outburst seemed to hang in the air. Behind Dr. Evans, more faces were appearing in the doorway. Students, a few professors I recognized. Word was spreading like wildfire through the back rows. The procession had faltered. The announcer's voice had trailed off. The tinny orchestra music was the only thing filling the auditorium, but it felt distant, like it was coming from another world. Dr. Evans gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval before turning his full, formidable attention back to Albright. "You have made a grave error in judgment, Dean. Amara Asante is not just a student, she is a representation of the very diversity and excellence this university claims to cherish in its brochures. To remove her is to tell every black student, every immigrant student, every student who doesn't fit your narrow, outdated mold, that they are not truly welcome here." He then did something I never expected. He turned his back on the dean completely, dismissing her as irrelevant. He faced the growing crowd of students in the doorway. "What is happening here," he said, his voice resonating with authority, "is an injustice. They are denying one of our own her moment of triumph because they are afraid of what they don't understand. Are we going to stand for that?" A chorus of "No!" erupted from the doorway. Maya was at the front, her face tear-streaked but defiant. "If Amara doesn't walk, none of us walk," she shouted. Another student I knew from my political science class yelled, "Let her walk! Let her walk!" The chant was picked up, growing louder, spilling from the hallway back into the massive auditorium. It started with a dozen voices, then 50, then 100. Panic finally began to dawn on Dean Albright's face. This was no longer a contained administrative matter. This was a full-blown protest, hijacking her meticulously planned, decorum-filled ceremony. She barked into her walkie-talkie, "I need more security. We have a disruption at the west entrance." But it was too late. Dr. Evans held the door open like a town crier, and students began to pour out of their rows and into the hallway, their black gowns flowing behind them. They weren't angry or violent. They were resolute. They formed a circle around me, a human shield of polyester and cardboard caps. The two guards, completely out of their depth, let go of my arms and backed away, melting into the crowd. I was standing in the middle of a swirling vortex of support, my own personal army of graduates. They were chanting my name, chanting for justice. I saw faces of every color, from every department, people I barely knew, all standing with me. But then I looked past them, through the now wide-open doors, into the auditorium, and my heart plummeted into my stomach. The disruption had reached the stage. The university president, a stern-looking man named President Wallace, was on his feet, his face a thundercloud. He was striding towards the podium, microphone in hand, flanked by more security. The hopeful, powerful chants of my friends were about to collide with the full, unyielding force of the university administration. I saw him tap the microphone, the feedback screeching through the auditorium, and a terrifying, absolute silence fell over the entire room. The silence was deafening. It felt heavier, more intimidating than all the shouting that had come before it. Every single person in that auditorium, graduates, parents, professors, was frozen, their eyes locked on President Wallace at the podium. He stood there for a long moment, letting the tension build, his gaze sweeping over the chaos at the west entrance, over the sea of defiant students, and finally, his eyes landed on me. I felt pinned by his stare, a specimen under a microscope. This was the end of the line. Dean Albright had summoned the final boss. "Students," President Wallace began, his voice amplified by the sound system, a calm, authoritative rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "Return to your seats immediately. This is your commencement ceremony. Do not allow the actions of one individual to disrupt this momentous occasion for everyone else." His words were a calculated blow, designed to isolate me, to paint me as a selfish troublemaker ruining the day for thousands. I could feel the momentum shift. Some of the students in my circle hesitated, their chants dying in their throats. They looked at each other, the weight of disappointing their own families warring with their desire for justice. I saw Dean Albright smile, a thin, triumphant curl of her lips. She had won. The power of the institution was absolute. But Dr. Evans was not an institution. He was a man. He took 2 steps out from the hallway and into the main aisle of the auditorium, making himself a clear target. "With all due respect, Mr. President," he called out, his voice carrying without a microphone, raw and powerful. "This is not the action of one individual. This is the action of a university that has failed to see an individual. You are asking Amara Asante to choose between her academic achievement and her cultural identity. You are telling her, and every student of color here, that to be accepted, they must first be assimilated, that their heritage is a distraction to be scrubbed off in a bathroom." He let his words sink in. Then he turned, not to the president, but to the thousands of people in the stands. "Is that the lesson we want to send from this institution? A lesson of exclusion, of intolerance?" From the stands, a single voice pierced the silence. "No!" I whipped my head around, trying to find the source, and then I saw him, my father. He was on his feet, his giant camera hanging forgotten from his neck. He was pointing, not at me, but at the stage. "Let my daughter walk!" he roared, his voice thick with a father's protective fury. Beside him, my mom was also standing, her tear-stained face a mask of fierce determination. My little sister was holding her embarrassing sign high, jumping up and down, and then it was like a dam breaking. Another parent stood. Then another. A whole section rose to its feet. Then another. A wave of solidarity rippling through the stands. They began to clap. Not polite applause, but a slow, rhythmic, thunderous clap. It was a beat, a pulse that resonated in my chest. It was the sound of hundreds of people siding, not with the powerful man on the stage, but with the lone professor in the aisle, with the scared girl in the hallway. President Wallace looked stunned. He glanced from the defiant crowd to Dean Albright, whose smug expression had dissolved into one of pure, unadulterated panic. He was losing control. The meticulously orchestrated ceremony had spiraled into a referendum on his university's soul, and he was on the losing side. The rhythmic clapping grew louder, more insistent. My fellow graduates, emboldened by the support from the stands, took up the chant again, but it was different this time. It wasn't just, "Let her walk." It was 100 different voices shouting their support. "Amara! Amara! Amara!" The sound washed over me, a physical force that pushed back the shame and humiliation and replaced it with a profound, overwhelming sense of belonging. These people, many of whom I had never met, were my community. President Wallace held up his hands, calling for quiet, but the noise only swelled. He leaned into the microphone, his voice strained. All right, quiet, please." The clapping and chanting slowly subsided, replaced by an expectant hush. He cleared his throat, his composure visibly shaken. He looked at Dean Albright, then at me, then at the thousands of expectant faces watching him. He knew he had only one move left to salvage the day. "Dean Albright," he said into the microphone, his voice tight, "return to your seat." The dismissal was public, brutal, and absolute. The dean's face went white, and she scurried away like a scolded child. The president then looked directly at me, and for the first time he seemed to actually see me, Amara Asante, not just a non-compliant individual. "Miss Asante," he said, his voice now softer, more conciliatory, "please, take your seat. Your name is about to be called." The crowd erupted. It was a roar of pure triumph. Dr. Evans put a heavy, proud hand on my shoulder and squeezed. Maya grabbed me in a fierce hug. Surrounded by my peers, I was escorted back to my chair in the third row, not by security, but by my friends. As I sat down, the announcer, looking relieved, cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone. "And now, receiving her Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science, magna cum laude, Amara Asante." As I walked toward the stage, the applause was deafening. I felt the Sankofa symbol on my cheek, no longer a mark of defiance, but a badge of honor. I saw my family in the stands, my father snapping pictures through his own tears, my mother blowing me a kiss. When I reached the stage, President Wallace shook my hand firmly, his eyes meeting mine with a look of grudging respect. He handed me my diploma, the smooth leather cover feeling like the most precious thing I had ever held. I didn't just walk across that stage. I floated. I had faced down the institution and won, not by myself, but with the voices of 200 activists, with the roar of my father, and with the quiet, unshakable strength of the ancestors painted on my skin.